Pale death kicks with impartial foot at the hovels of the poor and towers of the kings, the ode of Horace. Villa Julian and Rome, autumn 19 AD to autumn 20 AD. Emperor ruling, Tiberius, chapter 4. The summer stay at Villa Julian lasted until the last day of September. Long, hot days of summer shortened. Cool and misty mornings descended as the sun's rays lowered and stretched over the valley. The grapes grew plump, ripened and glowed golden in the late summer heat. In Rome, Timon, the master of the slaves, had been busy preparing for their return. He had been a faithful and loyal slave to Gaius since his purchase, some 25 years previously, from a Greek father. His eyes were dark, heavily hooded, peering half closed. The under-slaves did not know if he was directly looking at them, but he missed nothing, working along with Felix, Gaius' personal bodyguard. Their summer of relative inactivity was over. The household had to return to its hive of industry and pristine cleanliness. Timon barked out his orders. The cook, Prima, was seen daily waddling, huffing and puffing along to the street vendors, putting the fear of the gods into the market traders as she bartered and haggled for meats and vegetables. In her kitchen, bullying and slapping her hands around the heads of her underslaves, taking out whatever remaining anger she still had on the rolling and kneading of huge batches of dough. The kitchen was the place slaves sneaked to, foraging and stealing as they waited for their meagre proportions, dished out to them at the end of the day. Timon looked away when older slaves stole for the babies born to the household of growing families. Gaius tolerated relationships that grew from their close working and living conditions. He wanted contented slaves that would be more loyal and keep a harmonious, peaceful household. He made provision for couples to become like a married couple and have children together. Gaius wisely arranged a statement from the two parties to agree that they had bound themselves together and wished to have a family. He gained legal rights to their children as they grew older, working in his estates or Asinia's workshops. Gaius was fair, but a businessman at heart. His slaves gave him loyalty and cooperation. After 20 years of service, he allowed them to earn money from his enterprises and released them from slavery. Manumission was gained. Timon had received his own small enterprise money for the last 5 years and had shown by his course of action he was well on his way to gaining his freedom. In contrast with the household of Gracinus, all was not well, so many slaves living in the apartment blocks, the insulae, housing the ordinary citizens of Rome. It seemed a world away from Domus Gregoria with its large, airy rooms, the cooling waters from the atrium pool, an abundance of food and sweet-smelling perfume from the fresh flowers placed each day in the rooms. The insulae were tightly packed apartment blocks of 4 or 5 stories high. They were cracking and crumbling, designed and constructed poorly, being made of mud and timber hastily put together to line the pockets of city developers and greedy landlords. The stairways were dark and uneven corridors, becoming more precarious the higher the level. The first night of their return to Domus Gregoria, all was still. The household was asleep. Hannah placed a cloak over her head and padded sandals on her feet. She passed through the kitchen, grabbed a piece of bread and cheese, stepping out through the doorways and down the side passage. In the narrow alleyway, she turned sharply left, tripping over a bundle of rags left in the streets. The rags moved. A groan pierced the silent night air. She was not alone. A hand grabbed at her tunic. A sharp, rasping voice called out, "Help me!" Hannah bent down and saw that a small child was suckling at shrunken breasts. She placed a piece of bread into the outstretched hand. Greedily, with a feral look, the woman snatched the bread and gnawed at it hungrily. Hannah said, "I am a Hebrew slave and dependent on my master for all I have. I will try and come tomorrow in the evening with some more food for you. My mistress is kind. I will ask her to help you." As she quickly moved away, Hannah felt a sickening dread. Would she be able to keep her word to the poor woman she'd just left huddled in the street? She continued for a few more minutes down another alleyway. The insulae on either side were noticeably higher. On the ground floor, closed for the night, bakers, shoe menders, moneylenders, spice merchants, and slave traders. Hannah passed the dark, shut-up stalls and found the stairwell to the Insula Quirinius. She crossed the landing of the first two spacious apartments, then continued up two more dingy flights of stairs, progressively getting steeper and more precarious. The air was stale. The stairs creaked and the noises emanating from the apartments loud. Babies wailed, dogs howled, whilst men shouted out profanities. She reached the large, familiar wooden door. This landing was clean. The air smelt fresh, and a small lamp burned in an archway. Strains of a familiar song came from behind the door, the music of her childhood. Hannah knocked on the door lightly and waited. The singing stopped. A face appeared in the partially open door. The woman stepped forward with a lamp. A broad smile spread across her face. Immediately putting her arms around Hannah, she drew her in. "Hannah, come in, come in. How we've missed seeing you. How long is it since we last saw you? Come, sit with me. Reuben and Eli will be home soon from their work. What news do you have? How are your family?" Hannah looked at her friend Rachel inquiringly. "I was hoping that you may have something to tell me. Before we departed for the summer, I heard distressing news. The twins, who must now be 12, had been sold again into another household, a cruel taskmaster. Now I've returned from Villa Julian, I must find them. I've confided in my young mistress, and she's offered to make inquiries. Rome is vast. Many households do not even know how many slaves they have, let alone their names and uses." As Rachel listened, her face changed. Darkened, her smile vanished. She said, "Your two sisters were Esther and Leah? I remember them as young children with your mother. Those days were distressing for all of us, such sad times. When the men return, we will ask them also to make inquiries. Someone will know something. Among the families of Rome living here in Rome, we have many connections, slaves and freemen. Many slaves at the palace are Jewish proselytes and may have heard of your two sisters. I'll inquire of Cornelia and Claudia." Hannah felt the genuine warmth and love of her friend. They ate and drank together, friends sharing their joys and sorrows. A loud thud reverberated through the air as the door was flung open. Eli and Reuben burst in. Their faces were agitated, their eyes aflame with anxiety. "The most dreadful news. A decree of Tiberius Caesar. All Jews living in Rome eligible for military service are to be drafted into the army for guard duty to protect the Romans against the bandita in Sardinia. All must obey and renounce their God." Rachel stood up, aghast. "What does this mean? We've sworn our allegiance to our God. He fought for our forefathers, the Israelites. He brought our nation out of Egypt to a land of peace. We cannot give up worshipping our God. He's our protector. The Roman armies and their myriads of idol gods we cannot serve. Eli, we must leave Rome immediately. What will become of you and Reuben? When does this edict come into law?" Reuben took hold of his wife and said, "I feel blessed by our God that you're a woman of faith and integrity along with our fellow Jews who are loyal to God and look forward to the coming Messiah who will redeem us from this oppressive yoke of the Romans, if it is his will. But if this is not to be, then I too will not break my loyalty and faith in our God and will not join in the military service of the Roman Empire. The whole of our lives, God has provided us with protection and can do so now. Did he not rescue the prophet Daniel from the lion's pit and give strength to our ancestor Joseph while he was a prisoner in Egypt, and then elevated him afterwards for the saving of the whole nation of Israel? Even if some of the Jews do go along with this Roman edict, we will not. We must quickly prepare for departure in the early hours before daybreak. I do not know when this law will come into force. However, we have to leave Rome. We will go to our relatives in Pomponia to the east in the hills, 2 days' journey." As Hannah watched and listened, lamps flickered. Dark shadows flitted across the walls. A shiver trembled inside her as she moved towards Eli. Eli, your faith in God has strengthened me this evening. I came here heavy of heart and in distress. You are in greater danger than anything I have to experience. You've given me the courage to continue. May our God bless you all. When you can, get word to me of your circumstances. May God be with you. Hurry. Eli put his arms around Hannah and prayed for all of them to be kept safe and under God's protection. She left, returning to Domus Gregoria as silently as she had crept out. No human or animal detected her reappearance. In the dormitory bed she lay still, her heart pounding in the dark, starless night. Dogs did not stir, no owls hoot. An eerie silence pervaded that evening. Hannah closed her eyes and prayed for calmness to suppress her anxious feelings. Slowly her heart quietened, her breathing levelled, untroubled, calm sleep became her master. Pomponia awoke, restless, ready to begin the many tasks she'd set out to accomplish whilst away for the summer. Hannah fetched her writing scrolls and wax tablets. She told Hannah her concerns. I have so many questions that need answers. I cannot continue shielded for the rest of my life. I need to know what is going on in the world outside. I wish to go to the forum, into the markets to see how life is in Rome. I have lived these past 16 years here in Rome, in this beautiful house, guarded, protected, without fears. But that unsettling feeling I had before we went away this summer hovers over me. Hearing Rome, but not seeing it. Smelling it, but not tasting it. The whispered stories, I can no longer live in ignorance. Is it true that there are so many different from me? I want to see them, talk to them. What about your sisters, Hannah? We must find out where they are and what's happened to them. Hannah could see the brewing passion within Pomponia, the disturbing, praying questions on her mind. She related last night's events, the starving woman and the imminent danger of her relatives. Pomponia listened, her eyes darting to and fro over Hannah's face. Quickly she made up her mind. At last, she could take some action, see for herself. She jumped up from her seat and began pacing up and down. Tonight, we will go to see this woman, with bread, water, and a little milk for her child. I will go in disguise. You will give me an old cloak to place over my head, and we will go together in secret. Hannah shrieked in protest. Mistress, it would not be safe for you. My master will never allow this to happen. Pomponia firmly stuck her chin out. With determination in her eyes and a defiant flick of her head, she said, My father will never know. We will go together. If you do not choose to, then I will go alone. Hannah knew Pomponia was resolute. She was unsure of what to do. She also had secrets entrusted to her that she'd promised to keep from Pomponia. She had to guard her young mistress at all costs. However, now was not her time to reveal them. She would have to go along with her. Pomponia's safety was paramount. This is a foolish thing to do, but I cannot let you go alone. You know this. You will always have me, beside you. Tonight, we will go together. Pomponia continued. Now, these questions we have about your family, Hannah. I will go to my mother and arrange for us to visit my cousin Julia. I will stay for a few days at the palace. We'll be able to ask questions about your sisters. Aunt Livilla is often away. Julia has a great deal of freedom and slaves which will help us more. They will help us move undetected in and around Rome. We can discreetly find out about this new law regarding your people. That night, cloaked and hooded, Hannah and Pomponia crept out of the house. The small amphora of milk and bread with cheese strapped around Hannah's waist. Outside their alleyway, the path looked dark and shadowy. The clouds above parted momentarily, and the moon illuminated the way ahead. As the route turned sharply, they caught sight of the bundle of rags. Hannah signalled to Pomponia to wait. She approached the woman cautiously and gently laid her hand on the dishevelled clothing. There was no movement this night. Hannah lifted the rags, revealing the deathly face of this gaunt woman, cold and grey. Her lips were open and chapped, the baby similarly emaciated, attached to her shrunken breast. Their skin was translucent. Bones of the skeleton, sharp and pointed, stretched the parchment-like dry skin. Pomponia moved alongside Hannah and gasped. Before her, a woman, a baby, dead from starvation. Pomponia was shaking as tears streamed down her face. She looked at Hannah and cried out, "We've come too late. Not just because we've come tonight, but this woman and child would have needed help many days ago. What will happen to her body? What are we to do?" Hannah took hold of Pomponia and held her tightly in her arms. In her own short life, she too had never seen a dead person before, but she was aware of the shock this was having upon her young mistress and the danger they would be discovered and severely disciplined for leaving the house and placing themselves in jeopardy too. She spoke calmly to Pomponia. "Mistress, we have to leave this place. Believe me, this woman and child are no longer suffering. See, it is as if they sleep. They have no more pain or anguish. We have to move away and return to your house now. Officers patrol the streets and remove bodies to the potter's field north of the Esquiline Gate. We must hurry away now." Hannah half led, half carried Pomponia to the rear of Domus Gregoria. They silently crept back along the corridors. Hannah helped her mistress from her old clothing and gently washed her hands and face before placing the bed covering over Pomponia, who by now was almost asleep. Hannah stayed that night beside her mistress on a sheepskin mat. Each time Pomponia stirred, she reassured her and quieted her fitful sleep. For a night that had held vivid scenes of death and starvation of the human frame, it seemed to Pomponia when the sun rose, the birds sang again, the family all carried on their endeavours, that her own life would never be the same again. She had witnessed a scene of such grief, a mother and child clinging together, cold as stone, starved of food and care. Her thoughts went to her mother, her father, the way they had cared for her. None of them had even ever felt a pang of hunger. She had never cried out begging for help with no one listening. She only had to raise her hand. Immediately, someone came. Pomponia's heart was heavy. Thoughts tangled with her emotions. How was she to lift this weight of sadness that engulfed her? Her mind was restless, body listless. Indolent, laying on her couch with half-closed eyes, she reached for her casket and pens. Gradually her thoughts became words that moved over the papyrus into ordered writing. Pomponia felt the comfort of those few hours she spent opening up her young heart to the pain she had experienced, coming to conclusions that became part of her inner self. She felt a calm control again of her emotions. She resolved to build on the experience of the previous night, build strength and resilience to face future experiences. With a raised head and lifting her shoulders, her chin jutted out, her hair she tossed to one side. She was determined to find answers and not be afraid of what she would see or hear. She thought of Hannah and knew there would be much she could learn from her slave girl. Pomponia would watch, listen, and build upon what she already knew, and not shy away from whatever she discovered, for good or bad. Days passed. Hannah kept a watchful eye over her young mistress. She encouraged her to read poetry. Together they sang songs that Hannah had taught Pomponia in the Hebrew tongue. They were joyful lyrics, expressing happiness and hope for times of peace and tranquility. Pomponia enjoyed these mornings and played the lyre with Selene. The household was quieter now that Lucius and Quintus had left. Pomponia spent time in the afternoons helping her mother with the administration of payments and records for their business, overseeing the woolen artisans they supervised. It was a busy time before the winter months that would require the legions to have their stocks of woolen garments replenished. Life appeared to return to normal. Pomponia felt a sense of maturity about her thinking and activities. The days drew near for her stay with her cousin Julia. Her keen sense of adventure and inquisitive mind returned to its former self. When she was due to leave, her mother spent the afternoon helping her to arrange the clothing that she would need, along with giving last-minute directions on her behaviour and caution to keep her counsel to herself and her private writings. These words were to ring in her ears on many occasions over the next few days. You will be in the household of Caesar. Many relatives and associates of the household will be present. What you hear, do not repeat to anyone. Enjoy the friendship of your cousin Julia. Note the responsibilities of being involved in public life. Your aunt will not always be there to advise you, and possibly her counsel and behaviour you may find unusual. I'm entrusting you to the care of Hannah. She has strict instructions and will always act in your best interests. The palace of Tiberius is where you will stay whilst you're there. Also, you will visit your great-grandmother, Livia Drusilla Augusta, at the house of Livia. She's an older woman of great stature, for many years as empress to Augustus. Show her due respect and honour. An intriguing woman. Do not speak unless you are requested to respond. The trunks are loaded, your litter is ready, our slaves will accompany you. Your luggage will follow later. Pomponia said goodbye to her mother, who hesitated as she kissed her. Was there more to be said? Why the tears welling up in her eyes? Vipsania turned away. Pomponia gathered her belongings and left. It was only a short distance from their home to the palace. Most of the families related to nobility lived in this area. They had large houses built, spacious homes, statues and grand mosaic artwork adorned the walls and gardens. Moving along Palatine Hill, the statues became more elaborate and imposing, as if vying to outdo the next in their portrayal of an illustrious relationship to their ancestors, royalty and conquerors. The Forum fascinated Pomponia. Would she be able to look and listen from behind the curtain of her litter? As she entered the palace, Julia was there to greet her. Pomponia was used to lavish surroundings and the personal attention of many slaves, but the vastness of these rooms, the splendid ornate decorations, the number of slaves that quietly came and went was a new experience. Their apartment was a delight for her creative senses. Brightly coloured frescoes adorned every part of the walls. The gods and heroes of Rome glowered down ominously at Pomponia. She shivered and quickly moved her eyes toward the garlanded painted walls in red and green, hunting scenes with maidens playing the lyre and offering sacrifices to the gods for the bounteous harvests of grapes and oil. These apartments looked out onto a galleried marble walkway with views across gardens and lakes. Being elevated, the palace was always rewarded with a gentle breeze, which kept the air moving and fragrant. At last they were left alone. She showed Julia her writing chest and all the work that she'd recorded. Julia read the diaries that were on parchment paper. Reading in silence, she gasped on more than one occasion. Her fingers moved nervously towards her mouth. As she finished reading, her trembling hands placed the scroll into the casket and closed it firmly. Looking intently at her friend, she said, I will not repeat what I have read. There is so much that I could add, I have heard many stories and the horrors I have recently witnessed. These will have to be kept secret only amongst us. It is a precarious time for the Jews within their household too. They're quiet and fearful of laws that are against them. Let Hannah inquire of them for any news of her relatives. Do not speak to any one of these matters you've written down. I warn you, trust no one in the palace. We must appear carefree young girls, playing, singing, and laughing. These things I am saying may seem strange to you, brought up with a close, loving family around you. Her breath quickened as she turned to look around before whispering, "Take care. This place," she swept her hands in a broad gesture around her, "is not like your home, Pomponia." At this moment there was a click and a swish of clothing brushing against their door. Julia instinctively shot her finger to her mouth. Pomponia, startled, turned towards the door. In a louder voice, Julia continued as she walked towards the door. "Such fun we are going to have. We can still play childish games together in the gardens. I have so looked forward to these few days together. I must show you my pet bird. You'll laugh at the curious sayings it utters." She flung the door open, looking left and right. No one was there. They both looked at each other fearfully as their ears picked up the sound of clicking feet retreating in the distance. Closing the door, she continued, "Great-grandmother Dowager Empress Livia has always shown me kindness and listens to my cares. An older frail lady now, but sharp of wit and wisdom. Tonight at the banquet you will meet her. Maybe she could be our confidant." Pomponia looked around her. All this luxury. Her friends, sad, frightened, Julia clothed in satin. The sheen of the silk drapes moving over to touch as they parted. The distinct sound of a crisp swishing made her start. She turned towards Julia. Julia again raised her finger to her mouth. "That sound, Julia. We're heard at the door." Julia nodded her head slowly. She knew it was not the sound of linen-clad slaves retreating. We are powerless to do anything about the many things we have seen and heard yet. Let us talk about the banquet we will enjoy tonight. There will be musical concert and dancing. We'll be allowed to recline in the outer circle and observe. It will be bright and cheerful. She smiled at her friend, raising her right eyebrow. You will have a lot to observe, and I know even more to record. They both laughed together and ran out to play games for the rest of the afternoon. They had balls of tightly packed leather-wound balls around the thread which Hero, the dog, loved to catch and bring back to them. Later that afternoon, Aunt Tanisha arrived along with Corinna in preparation for the banquet. They took rooms adjacent to Pomponia and Julia. Noisily, causing quite an upheaval, directing slaves with their luggage, they barged into Pomponia's rooms. True to character, Tanisha bombarded them with questions about the evening and news from the Gracinas household. Before Pomponia could speak, Tanisha condescendingly congratulated her betrothal. Without stopping for breath, she expounded about the excellencies of her daughter's marital arrangements. She was very inquisitive about Pomponia's dowry and gifts she'd received from Alice. Pomponia listened as the drone of her aunt's imperious voice prattled away. Gradually she stopped talking, rose, and wished to leave, as she and Corinna had much to prepare for the evening ahead. With a backward glance at the two girls, she said, "Remember your decorum tonight, young ladies. You are respectable members of Roman nobility. No snivelling or giggling. I will send my slave girl Ortis to you both when we are due to remove to the banquet. Do not be late." "Very well, then. I have much to do." Just as she had arrived, she left with a noisy flourish of drapes, cloaks, and tinkling of gold ornaments adorning her wrinkled arms. The two girls looked at each other and suppressed a choked laugh between them. The evening was a delight for everyone there. Tiberius, his wife, and close friends all reclined on low couches, where the slaves supplied them with delicacies of pheasant, raw oyster, venison, and wild boar, along with roasted pig stuffed with sausages. The wine flowed in abundance, served in costly gold goblets. The younger guest was served secondly, and especially enjoyed the entertainment. Girls danced and performed to music from the flute. A group of 4 acted out a comedic mime, with the slaves supposedly making fun of the master of the house, who'd been drinking, so was unaware of the fun they were having with him. They all enjoyed the merriment. Even the Dowager Empress Livia seemed to find the antics highly amusing. She was seated very close to her son Tiberius. Keenly surveying all the people and surroundings, nothing missed her gaze. Pomponia felt the Dowager Empress' eyes piercing into her face. Pomponia immediately lowered her eyes for a few seconds, then, being unable to resist the temptation to return the look, raised her eyes, sure that her great-grandmother was very slightly smiling at her. A crooked finger beckoned for Pomponia to come to her. Pomponia rose and approached. So, you are the young Pomponia. Tell me how many years you are now. Pomponia replied, I am 16. Betrothed, I believe. Soon to be married? You will have children to carry the great name of our nation forward. Your future husband, bring him to visit me when he returns from his campaigns. Take great care in the passageways of the palace whilst you're here. Do not go unaccompanied. You will come with Julia to visit me tomorrow afternoon at my house. She waved her aside. Returning to her seat, Pomponia, knowing that soon they would have to leave, remained as quiet and still as possible. Looking, watching, listening. So much to see, so much to record. 2 officers of the Praetorian Guard rushed into the banqueting hall entrance. Tiberius called them to his table. He was relaxed and feeling in a beneficent mood, merry and not alarmed at their presence. However, they requested to speak with him privately. The guests' lowered voices rippled through the room as the music stopped abruptly. Tiberius left his couch along with Sejanus. A roar from the passageway startled all in the room. Tiberius then appeared to an audience of his closest family and friends. He addressed them with a face grave with pain. The saddest news has reached us this evening. My nephew Germanicus has died in Antioch today. I cannot speak now of this great sadness. His illustrious career in battles for our empire goes with him. He fell not to the sword, but sickness. I must leave you now. The banquet must end, for our household is in deep mourning. Sejanus, follow me. Hannah escorted Julia and Pomponia to their rooms as the rest of the party dispersed amidst much muted voices. Pomponia reflected on her brief recent encounters with life and death, poverty and extravagant luxury. What did it all mean? What was the purpose of it all? Was anything in life or the future certain? Her young mind reasoned, pondered, and rationalized. Without coming to definite conclusions, she reached for her writing box and leather-bound scrolls, and as was her custom now, she committed her thoughts to the papyrus. As she wrote, she unravelled the ramblings of her mind. Words flowed from her reed as the dawn light awakened the household, and Pomponia rolled herself in her woolen covers and closed her eyes to sleep. The winter months came and went. Pomponia grew in stature and mind. The following year, they celebrated the triumphal entry of her uncle, Drusus, from his military conquests in the month of May. Then suddenly, just 2 days later, Grandmother Vipsania died. Was the excitement of Drusus' ovation just too much for her weakened heart? She had lived a long and hard life. The whole family mourned again another death. The Emperor Tiberius was silent and left Rome for his villa on Capri. Vipsania had been his first wife, loved and lost. His continued absence and silence gave unspoken testimony to his mourning and grief. The visit of Pomponia to her grandmother, Empress Livia, had not taken place on the occasion of the banquet. An invitation to stay in the company of Julia came the following autumn of 21 AD.